The stars had never looked so cold to Admiral Marcus Cole as they did on that particular morning. He stood on the command deck of the battleship Resolute, his hands clasped behind his back, his eyes fixed on the distant blue marble that was Earth. 3 weeks had passed since the Valkyrie. Dominion made the greatest mistake in their 1,000-year history. 3 weeks since they learned that humanity was not the easy prey they had assumed. Marcus remembered the day the attack came. He had been attending his daughter's graduation ceremony when the sky turned orange. The Valkyrie fleet appeared without warning, without declaration of war, without any attempt at communication. They simply opened fire on 3 of Earth's largest coastal cities. Los Angeles, Shanghai, and Mumbai vanished under plasma bombardment in less than an hour. 17 million people died before lunch. The Valkyrie had expected tears. They had expected begging. They had expected humanity to fall to its knees and accept whatever terms the Dominion offered. What they got instead was something they had never encountered in all their centuries of conquest. They got rage. They got unity. They got a species that stopped fighting among itself and turned every ounce of its collective fury toward a common enemy. Within 48 hours of the attack, Earth's scattered defense fleets had assembled into a single fighting force. Within 72 hours, that force had tracked the Valkyrie attackers to their staging point in the Outer Rim. Within 1 week, humanity had captured its first alien world and sent the survivors of the Valkyrie fleet running back to their masters with a simple message. This was only the beginning. Marcus turned away from the window as his communications officer. A young woman named Karen Ross approached with a tablet. Her face was pale, the kind of pale that came from too many sleepless nights and too much bad news. She handed him the tablet without a word. The screen showed casualty reports from Earth's orbital defense grid. The repairs were going slowly. Too slowly, the Valkyrie would be back. Everyone knew it. The attack on their colony had embarrassed them in front of the entire galaxy. A young species, barely 2 centuries into space travel, had bloodied the nose of one of the oldest and most feared military powers in known space. The Dominion could not let that stand. Their pride would not allow it. Far from the cold silence of space, Ambassador Linda Vance walked through the curved corridors of Nexus Prime, the massive space station that served as home to the Galactic Council. She had been on Earth when the attack happened. She had watched the news feeds with horror as cities burned and millions died. Now she was here to speak for those who could no longer speak for themselves. The corridor was crowded with alien diplomats, and every single one of them stopped talking as she passed. Some stared with what might have been fear, others with curiosity, a few with something that looked almost like respect. Linda ignored them all. She had learned long ago that showing emotion in diplomatic circles was a sign of weakness. Today, she could afford no weakness. The council chamber was enormous, a vast dome capable of holding representatives from over 100 species. Today, only about 50 were present, but that was still more than Linda had expected. News of humanity's counterattack had spread quickly. Everyone wanted to see what the humans would say. Everyone wanted to know what came next. High Arbiter Zethros presided over the assembly from a raised platform at the center of the dome. He was a crystalline, a species made of living mineral that communicated through vibrations in their translucent bodies. When he spoke, his voice resonated through the chamber like a bell struck in a cathedral. The High Arbiter demanded to know why humanity had responded with such excessive force. He spoke of balance, of proportionality, of the ancient laws that governed warfare among civilized species. He suggested that perhaps humanity was too young, too aggressive, too dangerous to be trusted with the responsibilities of galactic citizenship. Linda let him finish. She let the murmurs of agreement fade into silence. Then she stepped forward and activated the holographic display built into her podium. Images filled the air above her head. Images of burning cities. Images of bodies in the streets. Images of children being pulled from rubble that had once been their homes. She spoke in a voice that carried to every corner of the chamber. She told them that Earth had never asked for this war. She told them that humanity had committed no crime, broken no law, offered no provocation. She told them that the Velthari had murdered 17 million innocent people for reasons they had never bothered to explain. And then she asked them a question that would echo through the halls of galactic politics for generations to come. What would you have done? The chamber fell silent. Even Zethros had no immediate response. Linda let the silence stretch, let it grow uncomfortable. Let every being in that room imagine their own world burning under alien bombardment. Then she deactivated the display and returned to her seat. Meanwhile, the captured Velthari colony world of Kepler 44 to be Captain Daniel Grant was facing a different kind of challenge. His Marines had secured the planet's surface in less than 2 days. The Velthari military garrison had surrendered after a brief but intense firefight that left most of their officers dead and their soldiers demoralized. What Daniel had not expected was the civilians. Thousands of them, huddled in underground bunkers, waiting for the human monsters to come and slaughter them. The Velthari government had told their people stories about humanity. Stories about a savage species that ate its enemies, that tortured prisoners for entertainment, that knew nothing of mercy or civilization. Daniel stood at the entrance to the largest bunker, looking down at hundreds of frightened faces. They were not so different from humans, really. 2 arms, 2 legs, skin that ranged from deep purple to pale blue. Their eyes were larger, their ears pointed, but their expressions were universal. Fear, desperation, the certainty that death had finally come for them. His lieutenant, a grizzled veteran named Pete Howard, suggested they seal the bunkers and move on. The civilians were not their problem. They had strategic objectives to secure, supply lines to establish, defensive positions to fortify. They did not have time to babysit enemy non-combatants. Daniel listened to the advice. Then he ordered his troops to distribute rations and medical supplies to every bunker on the planet. Pete stared at him like he had lost his mind. Daniel simply said that they were not the monsters the Velthari believed them to be, and they would prove it through their actions. Word of what happened on Kepler 44 to be spread faster than anyone expected. A human journalist embedded with the Marines recorded footage of soldiers sharing their food with Velthari children, of medics treating wounds that human weapons had inflicted, of officers meeting with civilian leaders to ensure order and safety. The footage made its way across the galaxy through 1,000 different channels. The species of the Galactic Council watched with confusion. This was not how conquerors were supposed to behave. This was not what they had been told about humanity. Some dismissed it as propaganda. Others wondered if perhaps they had misjudged these strange beings from the third planet of an unremarkable yellow star and in the shadows of Nexus Prime. Representatives of species who had long suffered under Velthari aggression began to whisper among themselves. Perhaps, they said, humanity was exactly what the galaxy needed. Perhaps the time had come for change. The Galactic Council chamber had not seen such a gathering in over 200 years. Representatives from 47 species filled the curved seats that rose like waves around the central platform. Some had traveled for weeks to attend. Others had sent holographic projections from distant worlds. All of them had come for the same reason. They wanted to see what would happen next in the war between humanity and the Velthari Dominion. Lord Kethril, the Velthari ambassador, stood at the speaker's podium with his forearms spread wide in a gesture of righteous anger. His scales gleamed dark green under the chamber's lights, and his vertical pupils scanned the assembly with barely concealed contempt. He had been speaking for nearly an hour, and he showed no signs of stopping. He called humanity a plague upon the stars. He spoke of their violent history, their endless wars against each other, their inability to exist in peace even among their own kind. He reminded the council that humans had developed nuclear weapons and used them on their own cities. He asked what species would create such things and then unleash them upon itself. The Velthari ambassador demanded immediate sanctions against Earth. He called for a complete trade embargo, a travel ban, and the recognition of humanity as a threat to galactic stability. He suggested that the Council should authorize military action to contain the human menace before it spread any further. Linda Vance sat in humanity's designated seat and listened to every word. Her face revealed nothing. She had spent years learning to control her expressions, to hide her thoughts behind a mask of diplomatic neutrality. Inside, she felt a cold fury that threatened to crack that mask with every passing moment. But she held herself still. Her time would come when Cathrell finally finished. The High Arbiter turned to the human delegation and invited their response. Linda rose from her seat and walked to the podium with measured steps. She could feel hundreds of alien eyes upon her. Some hostile, some curious, some hoping she would fail, some perhaps hoping she would succeed. She did not raise her voice. She did not pound the podium or wave her arms. She simply spoke in a tone that was calm, clear, and absolutely certain. She began by thanking the Velthari ambassador for his concern about galactic stability. Then she asked him a simple question. Who broke that stability first? The holographic display activated above her head, showing footage from the attack on Earth. The assembly watched as Velthari ships descended on sleeping cities. They watched plasma fire rain down on streets full of people who had no warning, no shelters, no chance of escape. They watched buildings collapse and fire spread in smoke, rise into skies that had been clear and blue just moments before. Linda spoke over the images. She told the council that 17 million people had died that day. 17 million fathers and mothers, sons and daughters, friends and lovers and neighbors. 17 million lives ended without reason, without warning. Without any attempt at communication or negotiation, she showed footage of human soldiers on Kepler-4 for to be distributing food to Velthari civilians. She showed medics treating wounded enemy combatants with the same care they gave their own injured. She showed officers sitting down with civilian leaders to discuss water, supplies and power generation, and all the mundane details of keeping a population alive. Then she asked the council to consider who truly acted like barbarians. Was it the species that attacked without provocation and slaughtered millions? Or was it the species that fought back and then fed its enemies? The chamber erupted in murmurs. Lord Cathrell tried to interrupt, but the High Arbiter silenced him with a gesture. Linda continued speaking. She said that humanity had never asked for this war. Earth wanted nothing from the Velthari Dominion except to be left alone. But since the Velthari had chosen violence, humanity would defend itself with whatever means necessary. She ended her speech with a simple statement. Earth did not seek revenge. Earth did not want conquest. Earth only wanted justice for 17 million dead, an assurance that such an attack would never happen again. How the Council responded to that request would tell humanity everything it needed to know about the character of galactic civilization. Far from the political theater of Nexus Prime, General Patricia Webb stood in an underground command center beneath the Rocky Mountains. Screens covered every wall, showing fleet positions, resource allocations, and intelligence reports from a dozen different star systems. The war was 3 weeks old, and already it had stretched humanity's military to its breaking point. Patricia was a small woman with short gray hair and eyes that had seen too many battles. She had commanded troops on 3 continents and in 2 off-world conflicts before the Velthari attack. Now, she commanded everything. Every ship, every soldier, every drone and satellite and defensive platform that humanity possessed answered to her authority, her aid. A young man named Christopher Lane approached with a tablet showing the latest intelligence. The news was not good. Velthari forces were massing near the border of their empire, pulling ships from defensive positions across a dozen systems. Early estimates suggested a fleet of at least 500 vessels, possibly more. Patricia studied the numbers in silence. Humanity had just over 200 combat-capable ships. Even with the technological improvements they had made since first contact with alien species, even with the fierce determination of their crews, those numbers did not add up to victory. They added up to a last stand. She walked to a secure terminal and entered a code that only 3 people on Earth knew. The screen displayed a single file labeled Operation Lighthouse. She opened it and reviewed the latest progress report. Dr. Nathan Price and his team were ahead of schedule. The weapon would be ready within 2 weeks. Patricia allowed herself a small smile. Operation Lighthouse was not a bomb. It was not a beam weapon or a missile or any kind of physical destructive force. It was something far more dangerous. It was the truth. Meanwhile, in a hidden location far from any official diplomatic channel, Ambassador Samuel Drake met with a representative of the Karathi Collective. The Karathi were a trading federation of 7 species who had maintained strict neutrality in galactic conflicts for over 3 centuries. They sold to everyone, bought from everyone, took no sides in anyone's wars. The Karathi representative was a small being with silver fur and large, dark eyes that reflected light like mirrors. She called herself Trader Yenth, though Samuel suspected that was not her real name. She spoke in a voice like rustling leaves and got straight to the point. The collective had watched humanity's response to the Velthri attack with great interest. They had expected the young species to be crushed, to surrender, to become another vassal state in the Dominion's ever-expanding empire. Instead, humanity had fought back with a ferocity that surprised everyone. Yenth laid a small device on the table between them. It contained star charts, technological blueprints, and detailed information about Velthri fleet movements and military capabilities. She offered it to humanity as a gift, with no strings attached. When Samuel asked why, she gave an answer that would change the course of the war. The collective was tired of the Velthri, tired of their arrogance, their aggression, their endless expansion. For centuries, the Trading Federation had paid tribute to keep the Dominion's ships away from their worlds. Now they saw a chance for something different. They saw a species that could stand against the Velthri and win. Samuel took the device and asked what the collective wanted in return. Yenth smiled, showing rows of small, sharp teeth. She said that when the war was over, the collective would like to discuss a trade agreement. Favorable terms, of course, given the circumstances. And perhaps, if it was not too much trouble, a mutual defense treaty. Samuel realized that the galaxy was changing. Species that had cowered before the Velthri for generations were beginning to see humanity as something new. Not as a threat to be contained, but as a shield to hide behind. Not as barbarians, but as allies. He returned to Earth with the Karathi data and presented it. To General Webb, she studied the star charts and the fleet movements and the technological specifications. Then she looked up at Samuel and said, "They might actually have a chance." The throne room of the Supreme Matriarch occupied the highest spire of the palace on Velthri. Its walls were made of living crystal that shifted colors with the matriarch's mood, and today they glowed a deep and angry red. Lord Kethril knelt before the throne, his forearms pressed flat against the cold floor. His head bowed so low that his chin touched his chest. The Supreme Matriarch was ancient by any species standards. She had ruled the Dominion for over 400 years, expanding its borders through conquest and intimidation until it controlled nearly a quarter of the known galaxy. Her scales had faded from vibrant green to pale gray, but her eyes remained sharp, and her mind remained sharper. She had crushed rebellions, absorbed rival empires, and broken the will of countless species. She had never known defeat, until now. Her voice echoed through the chamber like thunder rolling across mountains. She demanded to know how the council had dared to refuse her demands. She asked why the other species had not immediately condemned humanity as she had expected. She wanted to understand how a primitive backwater world had managed to humiliate her forces and capture one of her colonies. Kethril kept his eyes on the floor as he answered. He explained that the human ambassador had been clever. She had shown footage of the initial attack, the civilian casualties, the burning cities. She had also shown footage of human soldiers helping Velthri civilians on the captured colony. The contrast had made an impression on the council. The matriarch rose from her throne and descended the steps toward her kneeling ambassador. Her tail swept across the floor behind her, leaving scratches in the polished stone. She stopped directly in front of Kethril and looked down at him with contempt. She said that she did not care about the council's opinions. She did not care about diplomatic impressions or clever human ambassadors. The Velthri Dominion had ruled through strength for 1,000 years, and it would continue to rule through strength for 1,000 more. If the council would not condemn humanity, then the Dominion would destroy humanity so completely that no one would ever dare question Veltari power again. She ordered a full military mobilization. Every combat-capable ship in the Empire would be recalled from its current posting and assembled into a single, overwhelming fleet. She would send 600 warships to the human home system. She would burn their planet to ash and scatter their remains across the void. And when it was done, she would return to the Galactic Council and ask if anyone else had objections to Veltari policies. Cathrell raised his head for the first time since entering the chamber. He asked if perhaps such a response might be excessive. He suggested that a smaller force, properly deployed, could achieve the same result with fewer resources committed. The matriarch struck him across the face with enough force to send him sprawling across the floor. She told him that she had not asked for his opinion. She had given him an order. He would carry it out, or she would find someone who would. The walls of the throne room pulsed an even deeper red as she returned to her seat. Across the galaxy, Admiral Marcus Cole received the intelligence reports from the Karathi data package. He stood in the tactical center of the Resolute, surrounded by holographic displays showing Veltari fleet movements across dozens of systems. The picture they painted was not encouraging. Ships were converging from every corner of the Dominion. Battle cruisers that had been stationed at frontier outposts, destroyers that had been patrolling trade routes, carriers that had been protecting colony worlds. All of them were moving toward a single assembly point, and from there they would move toward Earth. Marcus did the calculations in his head. 600 Veltari warships against humanity's 200, even accounting for human determination and tactical flexibility, those odds pointed toward annihilation. The Veltari had fought wars of conquest for centuries. They knew how to destroy civilizations. They had practice. He sent an urgent message to General Webb requesting immediate deployment of Operation Lighthouse. The response came within the hour. The weapon was not yet ready. Dr. Nathan Price needed at least another week to complete the final calibrations. Marcus would have to buy that time with blood. On Nexus Prime, Ambassador Linda Vance made an unusual request. She asked for a meeting with the Therian Assembly, the oldest and most respected species in the known galaxy. The Therians had stopped expanding millennia ago. They had no military, no territorial ambitions, no interest in the conflicts that consumed younger species. They spent their time studying the universe, recording history, and offering wisdom to those who sought it. No one had asked the Therians for anything in centuries. When Linda's request reached their delegation, it caused considerable confusion. The senior Therian representative, an ancient being whose name could not be pronounced in human languages, agreed to meet with her out of simple curiosity. Linda did not ask for ships. She did not ask for weapons or supplies or strategic intelligence. She asked for something far more valuable. She asked for witnesses. She explained that a great battle was coming. The Veltari were assembling a fleet that would attempt to destroy humanity once and for all. Win or lose, that battle would shape the future of the galaxy for generations. She wanted the Therians to be there. She wanted them to watch with their own eyes and record what they saw with their own instruments. She wanted the truth of what happened to be preserved forever, untouched by propaganda or political revision. The Therian representative studied her, with eyes that had seen the rise and fall of empires. He asked why she believed the Therians would agree to such a request. Linda answered simply. She said that the Therians valued truth above all else. Whatever happened in the coming battle, the truth deserved to survive. After a long silence, the Therian agreed. He would personally lead a delegation to observe the battle. His ships would maintain safe distance and strict neutrality. But they would watch, and they would record, and they would remember. Whatever judgment history passed on humanity, it would be based on fact rather than rumor. On Kepler-4 for Tubi, Captain Daniel Grant received orders to evacuate. Command wanted his Marines off the planet before the main Veltari fleet arrived. The captured colony had served its purpose as a demonstration of human capability. Now it was time to pull back and consolidate forces for the defense of Earth. Daniel read the orders twice. Then he walked outside the temporary command post and looked across the settlement that his troops had occupied for the past 3 weeks. Velthari civilians moved through the streets, going about their daily lives with something approaching normalcy. Children played in a park that human engineers had helped restore. A market had opened where locals traded goods under the watchful but friendly eyes of Marine patrols. His lieutenant, Pete Howard, stood beside him and waited for instructions. Pete had changed his opinion over the past weeks. He had watched his soldiers share meals with Velthari families. He had seen medics teach basic first aid to local volunteers. He had observed something he never expected to see. Trust growing between former enemies. Daniel asked Pete what he thought would happen to these people if the Marines left. Pete did not answer immediately. They both knew that Velthari military forces would not treat collaborators kindly. Anyone who had accepted human help, anyone who had spoken with human soldiers, anyone who had failed to resist the occupation would be punished. The civilians they had protected would become victims. Daniel returned to the command post and sent a message directly to General Webb. He informed her that his battalion would not be evacuating. They would remain on Kepler 4 for to be and defend the colony against any Velthari attempt to retake it. He understood that this decision might be considered insubordination. He accepted whatever consequences came from it. Patricia Webb read the message in her underground command center. She could have ordered Daniel to comply. She could have sent military police to arrest him and his officers. She could have reminded him that soldiers did not get to choose which orders they followed. Instead, she approved his request and allocated additional supplies to his position. She told him to hold the colony as long as possible and to keep those civilians safe. Then she returned her attention to the main tactical display and the 600. Red dots converging on humanity's home. The storm was coming. All that remained was to survive it. The Velthari Armada dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the edge, Sol system like a wave of darkness sweeping across the stars. 600 warships arranged in perfect formation, their hulls gleaming with the distinctive green-black coloring of Dominion vessels. Supreme Commander Vethros stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Eternal Wrath, and surveyed the system that he had been ordered to destroy. Earth hung in the distance, a small blue dot against the infinite blackness of space. Vethros had studied the planet extensively during the journey. He knew its population centers, its military installations, its orbital defenses. He knew that humanity had gathered every ship it possessed to defend their home. He also knew that it would not be enough. His communications officer opened a channel that would broadcast across the entire system. Vethros delivered the ultimatum that the Supreme Matriarch had composed personally. Humanity had 24 hours to surrender unconditionally. All military forces would lay down their weapons. All government officials would submit to Velthari authority. All resistance would be punished with immediate execution, if these terms were not accepted. The Dominion fleet would reduce Earth to molten slag. Every city would burn. Every installation would be destroyed. Every trace of human civilization would be erased from the universe as a warning to any species that might consider defying. Velthari power in the future. The message ended. Vethros waited for a response. It came faster than he expected. Admiral Marcus Cole stood on the bridge of the Resolute and watched the Velthari fleet on his tactical display. 600 ships, the largest invasion force assembled in galactic history. Enough firepower to destroy everything humanity had built in 10,000 years of civilization. And standing against them, 200 human vessels crewed by men and women who knew they were probably going to die. Marcus did not bother responding to the Velthari ultimatum with words. Instead, he gave the order that every ship in the fleet had been waiting for. Engines flared to life across the formation. The human fleet moved forward to meet the enemy. The defensive line formed near Mars. Using the planet's gravity well to anchor their position, Marcus arranged his ships in overlapping fields of fire, maximizing their combined effectiveness. Every captain understood their role. Every crew member knew what was at stake. They were not fighting for territory or resources or political advantage. They were fighting for the survival of their species. The Velthari fleet advanced in 3 columns, their coordination flawless, their discipline absolute. Vethros had commanded hundreds of engagements against dozens of species. he had never lost. He did not intend to start today. The first volleys of plasma fire crossed the void between the two fleets. Space lit up with explosions as missiles found their targets and point defense systems struggled to intercept incoming fire. Human ships took hits immediately, their smaller size and weaker shielding making them vulnerable to the heavy weapons of the Velthari battlecruisers, but they did not break. They held their positions and returned fire with everything they had. For every human ship that fell, a Velthari vessel took damage. The exchange was not equal, but it was fiercer than Vethros had expected. These humans fought like cornered animals, which in a sense they were. On Europa, the frozen moon of Jupiter, Dr. Nathan Price worked frantically in a concealed facility buried beneath kilometers of ice. Operation Lighthouse was ready. The final calibrations had been completed just hours before the Velthari fleet arrived. All that remained was activation. General Patricia Webb's authorization came through secure channels. Price read it twice to make sure he understood. Then he entered the command sequence that would change the course of the war. Operation Lighthouse was not a weapon in the traditional sense. It was a communications array of unprecedented power, capable of transmitting across every faster-than-light relay in the known galaxy simultaneously. Price had spent 2 years designing it, building it in secret, waiting for the moment when it would be needed. The array activated with a low hum that Price felt more than heard. Energy surged through systems designed to push signals across distances that would take light centuries to cross. And then it began to transmit. The broadcast reached every inhabited world with faster-than-light communication capability within minutes. It reached trade ships and military vessels and diplomatic stations. It reached the Galactic Council on Nexus Prime. It reached species that had never heard of Earth and species that had watched humanity's rise with cautious interest. The content of the broadcast was simple. It was the complete, unedited record of the war between humanity and the Velthari Dominion. It began with the initial attack on Earth, showing Velthari ships descending on cities that had no warning of their approach. It showed the plasma bombardment, the fires, the destruction. It showed 17 million people dying in less than an hour. It continued with humanity's response. The counterattack. The capture of Kepler-4 for 2b, the treatment of Velthari civilians by human soldiers, the food shared, the wounds treated, the dignity preserved. It showed the contrast between Velthari aggression and human restraint in stark, undeniable detail. It ended with footage of the current battle. 600 Velthari warships attempting to destroy a planet of 8 billion people. 200 human ships standing in their way, fighting and dying to protect their home. The Galactic Council received the transmission during an active session. High Arbiter Zethros watched footage of Velthari soldiers executing human prisoners on a world that had been captured in the early days of the war. He watched civilian shelters being sealed and the people inside being left to suffocate. He watched atrocities that the Velthari had committed and then denied. The chamber erupted in chaos. Representatives shouted accusations and demanded explanations. Lord Kethrel attempted to claim that the footage was fabricated. But the technical analysis was already being distributed. The recordings were genuine. The timestamps were accurate. The evidence was overwhelming. In the Sol system, the battle continued to rage. Human ships fell one by one, their crews fighting to the last moment before their vessels broke apart. But they took Velthari ships with them. Destroyers made suicide runs against carriers. Damaged cruisers rammed enemy vessels rather than retreat. Every minute they survived was another minute the broadcast continued to spread across the galaxy. Supreme Commander Vethros received word of the transmission during a brief lull in the fighting. His communications officer played a portion of the broadcast, and Vethros watched his own ships being portrayed as monsters to every species in the known galaxy. He understood immediately what the humans had done. They had turned their defeat into a weapon more powerful than any fleet. He tried to contact the Supreme Matriarch for instructions, but the response that came was not what he expected. The political situation on Velthari Prime was deteriorating rapidly. Vassal species that had accepted Dominion rule for generations were suddenly questioning their loyalty. Trade partners were cutting ties. Military allies were refusing to answer calls for support. The matriarch's orders were clear despite the chaos. Continue the attack. Destroy Earth. Prove to the galaxy that Velthari power could not be challenged. Regardless of propaganda or public opinion, Vethros looked at his tactical display. The human fleet was badly damaged, but still fighting. His own forces had taken more losses than anticipated. And somewhere beyond the battle, every species in the galaxy was watching and judging, for the first time in his career. Supreme Commander Vethros began to wonder if victory was worth the price. The Karathi Collective made their announcement through every diplomatic channel available to them. After 3 centuries of strict neutrality, the Trading Federation was imposing comprehensive economic sanctions against the Velthari Dominion. All trade agreements were suspended immediately. All Velthari vessels were banned from Karathi space. All financial assets held in Karathi institutions were frozen. The announcement hit the Dominion like a second attack. The Karathi controlled roughly 15% of all interstellar commerce. Their banking systems processed transactions for half the galaxy. Losing access to their markets would cripple the Velthari economy within months. 3 other species followed the Karathi within hours. The Mendari Alliance, the Dreth Confederation, and the Yashani Republic all issued similar sanctions. They had watched the broadcast from Operation Lighthouse. They had seen the evidence of Velthari atrocities. And they had decided that neutrality was no longer possible. The Therian observers at the Battle of Sol transmitted their own testimony directly to the Galactic Council. They confirmed that humanity had fought defensively throughout the engagement. They documented instances where human ships had allowed damaged Velthari vessels to withdraw rather than destroying them. They noted that no human commander had targeted escape pods or medical ships. High Arbiter Zethros. Read the Therian report in the Council. Chamber wall representatives from 47 species waited in tense silence. The Therians were the most respected observers in the galaxy. Their word was considered beyond dispute. If they said humanity had shown restraint, then humanity had shown restraint. Supreme Commander Vethros received the news of the collapsing political situation aboard the Eternal Wrath. His communications officer delivered one report after another, each one worse than the last. Sanctions, condemnations, former allies refusing to take his calls. The galaxy was turning against the Dominion, faster than anyone had thought possible. He opened a channel to the Supreme Matriarch and requested permission to withdraw. The fleet had achieved its objective of demonstrating Velthari power. Continuing the attack would only increase casualties and strengthen the opposition. A strategic retreat now would preserve resources for future operations. The Matriarch's response came as a scream of fury that nearly overloaded the communication system. She ordered him to press the attack regardless of losses, regardless of consequences, regardless of anything except the complete destruction of Earth. She called him a coward and a traitor. She promised that if he returned without victory, she would have him executed in public as a warning to others. Vethros closed the channel and sat in silence for a long moment. Around him, his bridge crew waited for orders. They had heard the Matriarch's words. They knew what obedience meant and what disobedience meant. They watched their commander with expressions that mixed fear with something that might have been hope. The Supreme Commander opened a fleet-wide channel. He ordered all ships to cease offensive operations and hold their current positions. When his subordinate captains asked for clarification, he told them simply that he was awaiting new orders from command. The attack on Earth was suspended. Some captains obeyed without question. Others demanded to know why they should stop when victory was within reach. A few openly defied the order and continued their advance toward the human defensive line. The unified Velthari formation began to fragment as confusion spread through the ranks. Admiral Marcus Cole watched the enemy fleet fall into disarray on his tactical display. He had been preparing for a last stand, expecting his remaining ships to be overwhelmed within the hour. Instead, he was witnessing something unprecedented. The Velthari were arguing among themselves. He seized the opportunity without hesitation. Human ships surged forward in coordinated strikes. targeting the vessels that had continued their attack and the communication relays that connected the enemy fleet. The tactics were ruthless and precise, exploiting every moment of confusion. Within 6 hours, the Velthari Armada was in full retreat. They left behind dozens of disabled ships and thousands of survivors in escape pods. They left behind the wreckage of their invasion and the ruins of their reputation. They left behind a species that should have been easy prey and instead had become their worst nightmare. The Galactic
Out!
Council passed its resolution by an overwhelming margin. The Velthari Dominion was formally condemned for unprovoked aggression against a sovereign species. Humanity's right to territorial defense was recognized without reservation. Member species were encouraged to provide humanitarian assistance to Earth and to consider diplomatic relations with the human government. Lord Kethril stormed out of the chamber. Before the final vote was counted, his protests had fallen on deaf ears. His threats had been ignored. Everything the Dominion had built over 1,000 years was crumbling because of one small planet that should never have mattered. Ambassador Linda Vance stood at the speaker's podium and delivered a statement that would be remembered for generations. She spoke quietly, without anger or triumph in her voice. She said that H had never wanted this war. Humanity had been content to explore the stars peacefully, to learn from older species, to find its place in the galactic community. She said that the Velthari had forced humanity to fight. They had attacked without warning and killed without mercy. They had expected fear and submission. Instead, they had awakened something that they did not understand. Linda told the council that Earth sought no empire. Humanity had no interest in conquest or domination. All they had ever wanted was to live in peace among the stars. But she made one thing absolutely clear. If any species threatened that peace, if any power attacked human worlds or killed human citizens, Earth would answer. And the answer would be devastating. The chamber fell silent. Representatives who had underestimated humanity looked at the human ambassador with new understanding. She was not threatening them. She was simply stating a fact. Earth would defend itself. Earth would protect its people. And Earth would never forget what the Velthari had done. On Kepler 44-B, Captain Daniel Grant stood outside his command post and watched the sunset paint the alien sky in shades of purple and gold. His battalion had held the colony against 3 separate Velthari attempts to retake it. They had fought beside local volunteers who had chosen to defend their homes alongside the human soldiers. Word of the ceasefire had arrived an hour ago. The war was over. The Velthari had agreed to withdraw from all occupied human territories and to pay reparations for the damage they had caused. Negotiations would begin for a permanent peace treaty. Daniel watched. Velthari civilians emerged from their shelters and gathered in the streets. Children ran toward the marine positions, no longer afraid of the humans who had protected them. Adults followed more slowly, their expressions mixing relief with disbelief. One elderly female approached Daniel and pressed her forehead against his hand in what he had learned was a gesture of deep gratitude. He realized that this moment, more than any battle won or fleet defeated, represented humanity's true victory. They had proven that they could be fierce in war and merciful in peace. They had shown the galaxy that strength and compassion were not opposites, but partners. They had earned something that no weapon could have won: respect. Admiral Marcus Cole stood before a window on the Resolute, watching Earth rise blue and green against the darkness of space. The planet he had fought to protect was safe. The cities that had burned were being rebuilt. The dead would be mourned. But the living would continue. A communication officer approached with a tablet showing incoming transmissions. Dozens of alien species were requesting diplomatic contact with humanity. Some wanted trade agreements. Some wanted military alliances. Some simply wanted to talk, to understand the species that had done what no one else had managed in 1,000 years. Marcus looked at the messages and allowed himself a small smile. The war had cost humanity dearly. Friends had died. Cities had fallen. Innocence had been lost forever. But something else had been gained. Humanity had proven itself to the galaxy. They were no longer the primitives from an unremarkable world. They were equals. They were contenders. They were here to stay. The story of Earth's severe retaliation would be told across the galaxy for centuries. It would be studied in military academies and debated in political councils. It would inspire some species and frighten others. But above all, it would serve as a reminder of a simple truth that the Velthri had learned too late. Never underestimate humanity.